Welcome to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. I'm your host, Tom Schwab. And today we're digging into something I wish every podcast guest would understand before they step up to the mic. Podcast interview marketing is a marathon. It's not a sprint. If you've ever thought, oh, I'll try podcasting for a month and see what happens, then this episode is for you. I'm joined today by Jessica Morgan, our Chief Operating Officer here at Interview Valet. Together, we're pulling back the curtain on why instant gratification might be killing your momentum and how to shift your mindset to building lasting authority, impact, and results. You'll learn the warning signs of sprint mode, how to set realistic expectations for your podcast interviews, and what that first 90 days of your podcast interview journey should actually look like. This is about more than showing up. It's about showing up consistently with the right message, system, and commitment to drive real results. So if you're serious about turning podcast interviews into profits, not just appearances, grab your running shoes. This episode is your 12-month training plan. Let's dive in. Today, we live in this instant gratification economy, right? Where it's meaningless metrics. And today I'm sitting down and talking with Jessica Morgan on something that we speak often about internally and with our clients. This whole idea that podcast interview marketing, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Tom. Yeah, I feel like this is something we express a lot to our clients. And so getting to talk about it is pretty great because we can share with the whole podcasting industry how it is. I feel like we live in an instant gratification with social media, with, all of that sort of stuff. And so I used to work a lot with health and wellness clients, and it kind of came to me as I feel like oftentimes we think of the dieting, the January 1st, I'm going to the gym, and it's very much okay, I'm going to do this for 30 days. And if I don't lose 10 pounds, then I'm not doing this anymore. And it really kind of correlated to the podcasting and podcast interview marketing for me is it's not instant gratification. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so it's something that kind of came to me, and I had asked you, Tom, hey, can I hop on and can we talk about this? Because I feel like there is such a correlation here. So
I was going to say, when did people give something 30 days to work, right? When you're saying the 30-day diet, most of the time, like the New Year's resolutions don't make it more than a week, right? And it's this idea of, well, I dieted yesterday and I even went for a walk. And this morning when I stepped on the scale, I had gained weight. So clearly dieting and exercise don't work. I have proven it in the last day.
100%. I mean, and there's those apps out there that are like, be consistent and all this sort of stuff and lasting habits. I'm not going to lie. I've tried them and it's work, it's effort. And it's when you don't want to put that work and that effort in, it's very easy to fall off the bandwagon and just go, it's not going to work. I'll do it another time. But truly putting in, creating habits and seeing those lasting results, it takes a lot of work in the beginning and in the interim to make sure that, you are staying consistent, you're doing all of that. And so I'm excited to talk about all that today because literally with dieting, exercise, weight loss, all that sort of stuff, it's the same thing as podcasting. You need to put in that work. You need to do the promoting. You need to do the repurposing. You need to have landing or welcome pages and calls to action. And so it's work. It's not just I go on a podcast and I have 5 clients the next day. And so
and I think digital marketing is playing into this, right? Because, well, I go on Facebook. If I pay, if I put $100 into Facebook, they're telling me the next day what results I got from it. And they're asking me to put in 105 the next day, right? And there's this idea of, everything's got to be instant. And the funny part is it's not like you spend $100 in Facebook today and you're going to get, 10 clients. The thing is they're going to give you a lot of feedback on at times meaningless metrics, right? Oh, you got this amount of impressions. You got this amount of clicks, whatever it was. But are you optimizing for that or for clients? And, if it was such where you could just, pay $1 today and make $1.10 without any optimization, anything like that, it'd be printing money. And that's not how it works. And you know that it will work, but it's not going to work in day one. And I think podcasting is marketing. It's just not an activity. This whole idea of, you've got to have a system behind it. And I think that's why sort of the podcasting version of it, people get frustrated with it.
100%. It's also, you think of radio or anything like that. It's that, you see results faster. 500 people listen to me and I maybe got a couple calls, but there's no long-term benefit to that. There's no lasting, like we talk about with podcasting, it's evergreen. That's not going to be the same with that instant gratification of a radio interview or a radio little snippet or ad or something like that. And so I think oftentimes it is hard because they want that instant gratification. And when you were talking about the Facebook ads, it made me laugh because it sounds too good to be true. It's probably too good to be true. And so.
Well, and as you mentioned radio, I thought of a client that we worked with, right? And she had her first podcast interview. And I think she was heard, she recorded it on a Tuesday. And by Thursday, she called me and she was very upset.
And she said, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It's not working because she had done the interview Tuesday and she hadn't gotten any response from that. And I was a little bit confused. I'm like, it hasn't even gone live yet. And she didn't understand that, right? Shame on me for not explaining it early on. But her idea was that, she had been on a radio show before and, she got results from it within the first day, right? And she's like, I was on this interview and I haven't heard anything. And I had to explain it to her that the only person that had heard her was the host and maybe the person that was doing the editing, right? It wouldn't see results until it went live. Now, fast forward about 4 weeks afterwards when it went live, she calls me and she's like, it's working. And I'm like, yeah. And 80% of the listens come within the first 30 days. So it's not like everybody listens to it at the beginning. And the other one with that is the relationship to podcast or to radio. Is I remember somebody once time saying, well, I was on a radio show and I got heard by 4 million people. How come I'm on a podcast that's only getting heard by, 1,000 or 2,000? And I said, what radio show were you on that got 4 million listens? She said, well, I don't know. It was someone out of Indianapolis. And I said, they had a reach of 4 million, right? And she's like, yeah, isn't that the same thing? No, that's what the signal reaches 4 million people. I can't believe that everybody was listening to that station at that time. If you use that same analogy, I guess the reach of a podcast is 1 billion people, right? 1 billion people could tune into it, but considering not all of them speak English, it's probably just lying or exaggerating numbers if you start playing with that, right? It's this whole idea of start going and benchmarking from people that make it work, right? When people say it doesn't work, well, clearly people are getting it to work. So what are they doing differently than what you're doing? And there's a big difference we always talk about between activity and results, between podcast guesting and podcast interview marketing. And, if you're always looking for the new silver bullet, you'll never find one because they don't exist.
Exactly. Well, on podcast guesting, I would say people are, doing 5 interviews. It's the same exact message. They have 0 calls to action. They don't have a welcome page or a place for visitors to listen to. And then they're expecting immediate results, immediate lead generation. And they're not going to get that because also you're not switching up your message. You did 5 interviews and it's, again, like you said, it's that shiny new marketing tactic. Well, then let me try this. Let me try Facebook ads. Let me try something. And meanwhile, you have competitors of theirs who are maybe sticking with it. They're doing 6 to 12 months of interviews and really having the process behind it. And they're dominating the space. They're creating their own category. They're designing their own category because they are sticking with it. They aren't expecting that instant gratification.
And that's one of the things we always do with new clients, right? If they've done podcast interviews before, we'll go back and listen to those and I'll tell you why it didn't convert. Mm-hmm. And at times it's interesting. It's like, well, why did you think it would convert? Well, I went out on these interviews. I'm like, are those your ideal clients? Right? Well, no. Well, you can't say enough of the right things to the wrong people. Or I get at the end and I'm like, I listened to your 5 interviews and you kept telling your story, but I don't understand what you do or who you help. At the end of the podcast, you gave no calls to action. You didn't send them any place. It's like this idea that if I go out in the water in a boat, that's fishing, right? And I should catch fish. And if I don't, that proves that fishing doesn't work. Well, no. Did you go to the right place? Were you in salt water or fresh water?
Using the right bait.
Did you even use bait or a hook?
Right.
Some fish may jump into your boat, but that's not fishing. And if you just want to go out and enjoy the day on the water, that's fine. That's podcast guesting. But if you're really trying to get results from it, you need to do podcast interview marketing.
Right. And I would challenge you, it's not even podcast guesting, it's podcast guessing, like we always say.
Right.
But a core value I know we have here is a heck yes or heck no, or heck yes or no, I should say. And so it's either when we have new clients come on, it's a heck yes or it's a no. Same thing. We want people to be, you've talked about it before, but we want the missionaries who see the process, who want to do that, who don't have the commitment problem or are willing to be coached. And so that's why often we'll try it. We'll try it for a couple months and see if it works. It's a heck no for us because we need you to be able to see the results.
Yeah. And Jessica's nice, right? Some people in our team say one of the core values is heck yes or no. Most of the time I'll say it's hell yes or no, because if you got somebody that comes in, and a lot of times we're talking to the chief marketing officer, and I'll ask, is the talent committed to this? Is this a hell yes for them? Because guess what? The guest will always prove themselves right. If they're thinking, well, it may work, it may not work. If they're not fully committed, it will come through in the interview, right? If they're not coachable, if they're not committed to this working, if they're like, well, I'll try it for a month, and if it doesn't work, then I'm going on to something else. Save your time, save your money. It won't work because you will prove yourself right. You always prove yourself right if you think, this probably won't work.
Exactly. And when you're not fully committed, your messaging there will lack conviction, lack passion. And the podcast hosts and audiences can feel that. They can sense when you're not all in, when you don't have maybe a system behind you and a really clear message of what you want to share and how you can help and how you can express that connection with the audiences and get to their pain points. When you don't have consistent messaging, that really flops, honestly.
Yeah. And everybody thinks they're a great actor, right? I think I'm a great actor. Well, podcasts are so long-term, long conversation. Things come through. People can pick up on things, right? If you're not comfortable, if you're not confident, that comes through. And that's one of the reasons that we do the walkthrough interview. And we'll have people say, well, I've been media trained. I'm sure you have. Right. But there's different things in a podcast, and to actually walk them through so that they're comfortable and confident and they're really ready to convert on that, because you don't want to be figuring it out on your first few interviews there. Right. And going back, and I think sometimes I listen to their previous interviews, and I'm like, you never mentioned the name of your book. You never mentioned your company. And when you gave your URL for your company, you said it so fast that nobody heard it, right? 70% of people listen to podcasts sped up. So if you just go back to interviewvalet.com, God only knows what they're going to hear. There's a reason I had to buy interviewvalet.com, because when I said it fast, nobody would hear what it was. So it's that whole idea of it works, but you have to work it. It's an art. You've got to continually get better with that.
Exactly. And so often I feel like people hop onto a podcast interview and they just spew their bio. This is what I do, this is everything that I do, blah, 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 where you're not connecting with the audience at all. And that's one of the principles that we share from a good friend of the company, Jeff Barch. I believe it's in episode 8, if you want to go back and
Mhm.
listen to that. But it's to the first foundational questions. And so building on that, having that first foundational connecting, and what is your foundational story, not just spewing out your resume. And
And
so
I cringe every time I hear it. And it's something that the podcast booking agencies and the people that just want to connect to you are teaching this. And all they're doing is playing to people's ego and their ignorance, right?
mhm,
And they're just saying, just go on a podcast and tell your story and people will be attracted. Nobody cares about your story, right? One of the things we've learned and we teach, and it's not new to anybody, that nobody cares about your story. They
right.
care about their story. You've
Mhm.
got to talk to the
How can you
pain,
help
right?
them? Right.
Right. That whole thing of category design. We had that conversation with Al Ramadan, who wrote the book, The Existing Marketing Trap. And he talks about it. The pain is the point. People are there to find out how to solve their pain. And if you can talk to that, they'll listen. If
Yep.
your story supports that, they'll listen. But this is not the biography channel, right? You're not supposed to just be telling your story.
Right. Well, and we always say more is not better, better is better. But we do have clients who have done, 50 plus interviews over 12 months versus ones who did like 8 interviews for 3 months and then quit. And I feel like, granted, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the 50 plus over 12 months for one person. But those clients that we have, it's like 2 or 3 guests for that business that they're spreading it out, but they are dominating their market. We've talked about LMO on here before, but they have a ton of results that the people that 8 interviews over 3 months, they don't. They're not going to have that long-term momentum and that lasting.
Yeah, and LMO, we use it internally here because it's gotten so powerful. Large language machine optimization. Some people are calling it AEO. It's basically the fact that it's not that you're just talking to your ideal clients anymore. It's you're talking to the AI that refers them. And that's
Right.
something to keep in mind as you're putting this whole plan together, because it is a plan. To get results, not just an activity. And to me, you start with the foundation, right? And that first quarter, just focus on the foundational parts.
Mhm. Yep. And some of those, building those skills, kind of redefining and just refining your core message, what you're talking about, how you're connecting those foundational responses to questions instead of the resume and such. That's a lot of what we do here is just the systems for scheduling, following up, making sure that you're talking to the right audiences. All of that is really that foundation, and that's what we help our clients with a lot, is making sure that we have that foundation, that system. We're reaching out to that. This is not just a very large audience. This isn't Joe Rogan style audience. This is your audience. This is who you want to talk to. Now let's get it right.
And even defining the brand. And so many times people will say, what's your brand? Well, it's the logo. This is the colors we use. This is the font. I'm like, no, that's your graphic guidelines, right?
Right.
Your brand is, who's your ideal client profile, that ICP, right? What do you believe, right? What is your point of view? Because all of those things are so important. How do you want to be introduced? What do you want to talk about? And it's not just, the Tom Schwab story. It's like, no, here are specific topics, almost like if you were thinking of writing a blog, right? It wouldn't be the same blog over and over. So what topics do you really want to talk about? Because that is so important there. And I always think that first quarter is that foundational time. And we'll have people come and say, well, I just want to try podcasting for a month, right? Well, the data says that the mean time between when you reach out and they invite you and it gets scheduled and it gets recorded and it gets edited is 83 days. So you're not going to even see any results for 83 days. So why would you test something and stop before you see the results? I mean, it's going to be that first foundation. That first quarter is that foundation piece. The second one is really where you build that momentum.
Exactly. And so, well, the first one, we always tell our clients, we're not expecting major leads, major revenue, all this ROI. You're learning, you're improving, you're building the relationships. You're just really setting that foundation. And then we hop on to quarter two is, like you said, the momentum. So your messaging becomes natural. It becomes, I can only imagine how natural it is for you, Tom, to go on a podcast and talk about it. I know a lot of our team members are like, I need to prepare for like 2 hours before I do because I just need to like get in the moment. I feel like you're like hopping from interview to interview in a minute. You don't need that prepared because it's become natural to you. Your story is compelling. You start getting referrals to other shows. People start saying, hey, I have this other show, or I have a friend who would really love to talk with you. And that early relationship, the dividends really begin to pay off. You're able, it's not overnight success. It's that steady improvement responses. You've refined that. You've defined who your brand is. And you're just really getting better at it.
Yeah, it's that you're getting comfortable, you're getting confident, and you're starting to get feedback from the hosts and even from the guests once that starts there. So each interview is building on itself. And one of the things we always say is don't just do more interviews, do more with your interviews. So once they start coming out, now you're repurposing the content, you're putting it up there on social media. And so you're getting so much more out of this. And if you would have stopped at month 1 or 2, you would have been right. It won't work. But if you keep working it, it does work.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then beyond that, we have, I mean, a lot of our clients are with us for a year or so. And we say that first, 2 quarters are really that momentum, that foundation. And then we move into our results phase where, having those compounding efforts, people are repurposing, they're promoting, they're reaching more people with the content that they have. They have that strong referral network and the refined systems that's where they start seeing the results. The real ROI is when it starts to happen in that quarter 3, quarter 4.
Yeah. And some people will say, well, what do you do after that first year? Well, you've learned so much on what's resonating. You focus down on audiences and maybe you niche down into an audience or a group that is converting well. Or maybe you look and say, we have done all the podcasts in this area. It's time for us to go to a different area. And I can think of one client that we had that they were with us for years and years. And it was like every quarter they were talking to a different audience. And so they kept redoing it. It's like this quarter, we want to go after roofers, right? And okay, let's go off against all the roofing ones. This one, we want to go after physicians. All right, that's fine. And you can continue to refine. And it's great because it's a marketing system that you've already built up the confidence in and now can really start applying it to different audiences.
Right, exactly. And there's that tipping point where the results really become they accelerate, they come to fruition and all of that. And most people quit right before that, before they see those results. And it's kind of like stopping your workout routine just before you see those visible results. It just quite hasn't tipped there. And they're like, well, it doesn't work. And so that's why consistency really wins every single time.
Yeah. And it's that tipping point. It's like once you get there, it seems like everything else gets easy. And then you can just start doubling down on it, right? I think of last year, we started to see that our clients were getting referrals from AI, right? That there's no doubt that AI is indexing all of the podcast interviews. So once you start to hit that tipping point, internally, we did it where it's like, okay, we've got to get more people out there talking on podcast interviews, and our clients did it the same way. And so to get to that tipping point, and then it's from an engineering standpoint, for every little bit of extra effort you make, you get a huge return on investment from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of warning signs if you're in sprint mode, right? We had one client who wanted to do 100 interviews in 1 month for massive exposure. First of all, I don't know how one could even do that, juggling everything else in their life. But also, it doesn't work. It's not, you're not doing better interviews. You're just doing more. And
Yeah.
That immediate ROI from interviews, that's another warning sign that I would say, nope, you're in sprint mode. Let's talk about marathon mode.
Sometimes it's tough, right? Because I talk with all of our potential clients, right? And they have been taught, they have been maybe manipulated is the right word, that all I had to do is do more. And the person that's charging them per interview is saying the answer is more and more interviews. And you start looking at that and going, well, why did you think this was a good audience here? Or it doesn't seem like anything is targeted. And they're like, well, yeah, but if I do more interviews, it'll work. And it's this idea that it's a numbers game. And I think digital marketing plays to that, right? It's just a numbers game. Well, if you believe it's a numbers game, then go to Times Square and just start talking to random people, right? You may get a client, you may get arrested, right? Depending how creepy you are, but
Right.
it's not a numbers game because you can't say enough of the right things to the wrong people. Or if you did 50 interviews and they weren't working for you, why would you do another interview until you figured out what it was missing there? And years ago, we wrote the book, Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with the Targeted Interview Strategy.
Mhm.
And I remember people looking at that and saying, do I have to do all of this? Do I have to actually do the research beforehand? Do I have to make the calls to action? Do I have to send them a separate page? And I'm like, you're a grown human, right? You don't have to do anything. All I'm telling you is that after a decade, we figured out the recipe. And I know if you do these things, you'll get the results, right? If you want to test it and see if you can leave parts out, let me know how it works out. I always think of, early in life, I tried to make a cake for a girlfriend, and I didn't know what was it, baking powder or baking soda or whatever it is, I didn't like the taste of it. It's only a quarter teaspoon or something.
Right.
It couldn't
Not
be that
much.
important,
Mhm.
right? It couldn't be that important. Boy, when I made that cake, it didn't turn out like I wanted, right?
I bet it didn't rise. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, yeah, and we've talked about this many times, but the Groundhog's Day interview, right? That's another thing that I think, okay, you're in sprint mode, is every single interview sounds the exact same. And it's people are gonna, like you always say, they're either gonna turn you up or turn you off. And if I'm hearing the same thing over and over again, I'm gonna turn you off. And so having it be, we had a client who thought about it like his book. He had a book that he was talking about, and every episode was almost like a chapter. And he's like, for more, you can go to my book. This is a chapter 8. We'll give you all the XYZ that you need and stuff. And so thinking about it like a chapter, your topics that you talk about, it's hard because sometimes hosts will see all your topics that you can talk about and they want to hit every single one. But doing just like 1 or 2 per interview, kind of treating it like a book. We're doing chapter by chapter, but for the rest of the book, that's where you direct them to your welcome page, your calls to action, all of that. And so, yeah, if we're not building the systems, the content, all of that for long term, you're in sprint mode.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the advisors that you've gotten are trying to do what they've learned for a different medium. So give me a prime example. If you're launching a book on radio, right? Tony Robbins used to be famous for this. They would get him 5-minute interviews on all these different primetime drive radio shows, right? And every 5 minutes was the same information, right? And he would work his way from 6 a.m. in the East Coast to 9 a.m. in the West Coast. And every 5 minutes, he was on a different radio station, giving his 5-minute spiel. And now you've got PR companies that say, do the same thing on podcasts. Well, the difference is that podcasts should be longer, right? You should be talking about more things, and that somebody in Florida is not going to listen to Primetime Drive in San Francisco, but a podcast listener may listen to quite a few of your interviews. And if they start hearing that you have only got 15 minutes of content, you're going to lose all respect, all credibility, and you're not going to be able to repurpose the content because everyone sounds the same. Or when AI looks at that, they're going to say, there's nothing to index here. It's almost like somebody coming back and saying, I did 52 blogs last year. Well, that's great. And until you realize that, no, you just reposted the same blog 52 times.
Right.
That doesn't count.
Exactly. Well, Tom, let's give our listeners their own very own marathon training plan for 12 months commitment. What do they need to do to start out?
Well, I think the first one is something that one of my mentors taught me. Dan Miller from 48 Days to Work You Love. He said, if you're not going to do something for 365 days, don't do it for one. Mm-hmm. And I was like, ooh, all right. Are you committed for the long run there? So if you are, I think the first one is set realistic expectations, right? What do you want it to look like at the end of 1 year, and then work your way back from there? Right. And this idea of, I want to have $1 billion business. That takes more than a year. What's that next step? So set realistic expectations for the end of the year and then work back into those.
Yeah. Well, and it's also focusing on systems. We have systems for, processes, and systems for our businesses, processes for our home life. But if you don't have that here, you're gonna really fall off of your marathon training. So building those repeatable processes, not the one-off topics or tactics, just really repeatable processes that work and that you can build upon throughout your marathon.
I'm going to add to that too, the focusing on systems. Don't start with your own system, right? You're not the first person to run a marathon. You're not the first person to try to grow your business with podcast interview marketing. So use the systems that already work, right? You'll be much more successful with that, right? That idea of learning from your own mistakes is painful. Learn from somebody else's. And in the same way, while we talked about setting realistic expectations for the end, right? Those are the lagging indicators. What are the leading indicators? What are the things that you can do today? And, like with dieting, right? All right. I didn't have any sweets today and I got in 10,000 steps. It's not going to move the weight today, which is the lagging indicator, but it's a leading indicator, right? So it's the same thing with podcast interview marketing. What did I do that is going to give these results, right? Maybe it's, I did an interview today that's going to go live next quarter.
Right. It's also refining over the year, right? We're not going to do the same thing for the whole year. Let's refine, let's track what's working, adjust our strategy based on what we've seen results from and what works, what is connected with the audience, all of that. And we do that for our clients is, hey, let's do for your first few interviews and then some throughout the middle and stuff, let's run an analysis. Let's see, how did you deliver those calls to action? What were your strengths? What can you improve upon? What are your action items? So that you're constantly improving. You're not staying at that stagnant place.
That analysis of interviews
Mm-hmm.
is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people will say, you should listen to your own reviews or your own interviews, right? Sort of like watching your game film so that you can see, this is what I did well. This is what I didn't. But I think having an outside person look at that, be it your account manager, or we've even, got the custom AI agent now where we'll look at that, because often what I find is if you ask a friend or family member, they love everything you do, right? They want you to be happy. They don't want you to be better. And even when you ask an individual, sometimes it's really hard to say, what were you thinking here? But when we take it through the agent, it's interesting. And I love it when our team does this on one of my interviews and it comes back and it's like, Tom, you talked 37% faster than the host. You may want to slow down, or your longest monologue was 7 minutes and 12 seconds. You may want to shorten up those true false answers, Or even the idea of that was a great story, but you didn't tell the moral of the story. You just left it hanging there. And so having that outside view on it can make all the difference between getting more from every interview and just doing more.
Right. Exactly. Well, and then we also need to set up the discipline, right? That's probably the one of the strongest factors in marathon training is discipline. So that consistent outreach, not just sporadic bursts here and there, consistent outreach every week, proper interview preparation, making sure that you're prepared. You know what the host is talking about. You know what the listeners want to hear on that podcast. Following up, making sure that you're repurposing the content as well, kind of starting and building on those relationships and nurturing the relationships with those hosts. Because a lot of times hosts become clients or lead referrals, all of that to you.
Yeah.
So doing that weekly discipline sets you up so strong for your marathon. But I also have to say, for our fellow fans of Parks and Rec, you need to treat yourself every now and again. Celebrate those small wins, acknowledge those milestones that you've done, and just really, if, okay, I'm going to do all of this outreach and all of this nurturing and relationship building. And then once I do that, I get to do this. I'm going to celebrate and I'm going to treat myself with this little thing here. I think that's so important because a lot of discipline comes with podcast interview marketing, and it is a marathon. It's not just a little sprint. So you got to treat yourself along the way.
Treat yourself.
Treat yourself.
Well, one that I always point to, and he has publicly said this, and I share this because he has given us permission to, is Craig Cody. When he first started to work with us, he'd worked with another agency before, and they just told him, just go out there and talk. Now, Craig is an interesting guy. He's got a great story, but he's not trying to be a storyteller. He's a great accountant. He's a great fractional CFO. And so when he came to us, said, what are you trying to do? And he's like, get on podcast interviews. I'm like, no, that's a hobby, right? What are you trying to accomplish with this? And he said, I want to get new clients. Okay. Who are your ideal clients? And it was interesting because interesting guy. He's a retired New York City cop. And he's got more personality than any accountant you'd ever want to meet. And he said, I want to get 50 different clients in 50 different industries in 50 different states. And I'm like, why? And he says, because most of his people were brick and mortar on Long Island. Oh, okay. So Jessica, we start going out on different podcasts, right? And testing different ones and focusing on different stories, different audiences. It's almost like we're testing different bait in different bodies of water. Well, he gets on a dental podcast and it's like fish in a barrel. And we take it to him and he's like, oh yeah, I love dentists. They're recession proof. They're good cash flow. So he said, let's get on more podcasts on with dentists. And so this is what we talked about before. He had that foundation and then he started to get the results with it. Then he started to optimize with it. And if he wouldn't have done that, he wouldn't have known what was working and what wasn't working. And this allowed him to get better and better results. And so he was able to go out on these podcasts, and then he started to test different audiences. And so I think that's a great, great way to do it. Somebody else like Carla Fowler, right? Carla is amazing. MD, PhD, and she used it to test different audiences, but also to build up her social media because she would post things on LinkedIn and she was smart enough. She was systemic enough to test this and optimize it and use it like a marketing system. And she saw when somebody resonated with a post, all right, I've got to talk more about that. If it got crickets, all right, that's something my audience is not interested in. And so this is this optimization of using it as a marathon, not just an ego sprint of, I just want to tell my story.
Exactly. So listeners have their marathon training plan. Now they need the action steps. What do they do? So I would say immediate actions, you need to make that commitment. You need to decide, okay, I'm going to do a 12-month podcast interview marketing plan. I'm going to set up the systems. I'm not just relying on my motivation, because if we were relying on motivation, we'd never have it. At least I wouldn't. We'd build those processes. We'd make sure that we are are defining our success metrics. We're focusing on relationship building and message refinement, like you talked about with Craig. He's defining and refining his target all the time. And that's what we are doing early on. We're defining those success metrics, and then we're refining, and we're constantly improving and strategizing.
Yeah. And it's this idea of changing your mindset, that whole shift around it. If you're looking for a silver bullet, they don't exist, but good luck. Right. And stop asking, is this working after one day or after 1 month? But am I working it? What leading indicators am I seeing? Am I doing the right things? What early signs of success am I seeing? Those are important. And then also looking in the mirror and say, how am I improving? If you don't improve from interview 5 from interview 1, you're not doing it well, right?
Exactly.
You should be improving your message, your speaking, all of that. And then I think that idea of start with the end in mind, right? Of this idea of what do I need to be? What kind of person do I need to be to do this? Right. One of our clients, Bix Bixon, a futurist out of Vancouver. I always loved how he said is like, most people don't have a future. They've got an extension of the past. Right. So it'll be, I did 10 interviews last year. I didn't get any results with it. So I'm going to do 12 interviews this year. Well, that in the Navy, we called that doubling down on stupid, right? Start with where do I want it to be in a year from now, right? Well, I want to get clients from this. I want to get speaking engagements from this. I want to launch that book in a year. Okay. And then start having the conversations that draw you to that. So starting, like we talked about, setting a goal for a year and then having the conversations that really drive you to that.
Exactly. So I would say my challenge to all of our listeners are really, before you book your next podcast interview, ask yourself, are you committing to the marathon, or are you just looking for another sprint? Are you dominating your industry? Because the people who are dominating the industry right now through podcast interview marketing, they made that decision 12 to 18 months ago. And the question is, what will you have built 18 months from now?
And that's the reason why Jessica Morgan is our Chief Operating Officer, right? We talk about the visionaries and the implementers, and often when it's founder-led marketing, they're the visionaries, right? They're the idea of, oh, this is great. Let's do it for the next 30 days. Well, you've got to do the execution on that. And I think all I could say is take Jessica's advice on that, because it's about the execution and the execution over time, right?
Start now. What are you waiting for?
There are no overnight wonders on that.
Right.
And like you said, that person that's dominating the market today started talking on podcasts 18 months ago. So the best time to do it was 18 months ago. The best time, second best time is today.
Today. Yes. And I need to take my own advice for my own exercise. I need to start my own marathon plan. So yes. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in today's episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. If there's one thing I hope you're walking away with, it's this. You don't win a marathon by sprinting that first mile. Jessica and I laid out the blueprint for shifting from a short-term tactics to a long-term system that works. Because the goal of being interviewed on a podcast, it's not just about getting heard. It's about predictably driving results. It's not about how many interviews you do. It's what you get out of every single interview. So here's your next step. Commit, not to just doing one interview, but to build a strategy around it. Set realistic goals. Focus on proven systems. Refine your message. And most importantly, stick with it long enough to see those compounding results. Now, if this resonated with you, head over to interviewvalet.com and let us help you train for that marathon. Because the truth is, most guests waste their time Then when they don't see results, they quit. Let's make sure you're one of those that swear podcast interview marketing works. Until next time, this is Tom Schwab, reminding you, as the category pirates say, marketing that doesn't drive results, that's called arts and crafts. And podcast appearances, well, if they're not driving results, that's not called marketing. It's a hobby. Well, stay strong. The world needs to hear you now more than ever.